November 1976. A cold Saturday morning at a farm auction in Iowa, Gary Henderson just did something that made everyone laugh out loud. He bid $400 on a tractor that didn't even run. The John Deere dealer, Rick Sullivan, couldn't stop laughing. $400, he shouted so half the crowd could hear. Gary, that thing's got a cracked block. You just paid $400 for scrap metal. The tractor sat there like a corpse, covered in mud, rust eating through the metal, one tire completely flat, engine leaking oil onto the ground. The auctioneer had warned everyone, sold as is, probably not repairable. Gary bid anyway, because $400 was all he had left in the world. See, Gary was 39 years old, farming 280 acres he'd bought 7 years earlier for $300 per acre. He owed $76,000 on that land. His only working tractor had just died 2 weeks ago. Without a tractor, he couldn't plant next spring. Without planting, he'd lose everything. So when Rick Sullivan stood there in his nice jacket and clean boots, laughing at him, Gary said quietly, "I can fix it." Rick laughed even harder. "You can't weld a cracked block, Gary. It's impossible." But here's what Rick didn't know. Here's what nobody at that auction knew. Gary Henderson was about to prove every single one of them wrong, and it would cost the dealer everything. Gary loaded that broken tractor onto a borrowed trailer and hauled it home. His wife Carol came out when she heard him arrive. She looked at the rusted heap. She looked at her husband. "That's what you spent our last $400 on?" "I can fix it," Gary said. Carol had been married to him for 16 years. She'd seen him fix things people said were impossible. She took a breath. "Okay, show me." 4 months. That's what Gary had. 4 months before spring planting. 4 months to rebuild a tractor that everyone said was scrap. 4 months working every evening after farm work, every weekend, every spare moment in his shop. And the first thing he had to tackle was the thing everyone said couldn't be done. The cracked engine block. Here's what most people don't understand about cast iron. You can't just weld it like regular steel. The heat makes it crack worse. But Gary had learned a technique from his father, who'd learned it from a Depression-era mechanic who'd had to make things work with nothing. You use nickel rod. You preheat the entire block slowly. You weld in tiny beads. You let it cool even slower. Gary spent 2 weeks just preparing that crack. He ground it out with an angle grinder, drilled holes at each end to stop it from spreading, cleaned it with solvent. Then he built a heating box from salvaged fire bricks, positioned 3 propane torches around the block, and spent 6 hours bringing the temperature up to 500 degrees. The welding took 3 days, 2 inches of weld at a time, 30 minutes of cooling between each bead. His hands cramped, his back ached, his eyes burned from staring at the bright arc through his helmet. But when he finished, he had a solid weld filling that crack. He buried the block in sand and let it cool for 48 hours. When he pulled it out, the weld looked perfect. No cracks, no warping. But would it hold under pressure? He had no way to test it. He wouldn't know until he put everything back together and tried to start it. While the block cooled, Gary tore into everything else. The hydraulic pump was seized. Rust had locked the gears solid. He soaked it in penetrating oil for a week, worked it free, cleaned everything, replaced the seals. $23 in parts. The steering linkage was broken, so he fabricated a new one from steel stock. $8. The carburetor was gummed up with old fuel. He soaked it for 3 days, cleaned every passage, rebuilt it. $12. The magneto, the pistons, the valves, the oil pump, every single system. His neighbor Jim Peterson would stop by sometimes. "Still working on that scrap pile?" he'd say, shaking his head. Jim farmed 400 acres next door with new equipment, everything financed. He couldn't understand why Gary was wasting his time. March 1977, 4 months after buying that tractor. Gary reassembled the engine, torqued everything to specification, filled it with oil, connected the fuel line, set the timing. His wife Carol came out to watch. Their 2 kids stood behind her. This was it. This was the moment. Would that welded crack hold? Gary primed the carburetor, set the choke, engaged the magneto. He cranked it. The engine turned over once, twice, 3 times. It caught, sputtered, caught again, and ran. The sound of that engine starting, that $400 scrap tractor running after 4 months of work, was one of the most satisfying sounds Carol had ever heard. Not because of the engine itself, because of what it represented. Her husband had just proved everyone wrong. Gary let it warm up. He checked for leaks. The welded block was holding. No oil, no coolant. The repair had worked. He tested everything. The hydraulics functioned. The steering worked. Everything worked. Total cost? $400 for the tractor. $120,000 in parts. $15 engine hoist rental. $542 total. Comparable used tractors were selling for $2,800 to $3,200. Gary had just built a $3,000 tractor for $540. More importantly, he had a tractor to farm with. Without it, he would have lost everything. Gary farmed the 1977 season with that rebuilt Farmall. Planted 200 acres of corn, 80 acres of beans. Had a decent year. After all expenses, he netted $9,500. His land payment was $8,736 per year. He made it with $764 to spare. That summer, Gary went to Mason City to buy parts at Rick Sullivan's John Deere dealership. Rick saw him, called out, "Hey Gary, how's that scrap tractor working out?" "Fine," Gary said. "Farmed 280 acres with it this spring." Rick's smile faltered. "Wait, you got it running?" "Yeah. Welded the block, rebuilt the hydraulics, fixed everything. Cost me $542 all in. Works fine." Rick stared at him. "You welded a cracked block and it held?" "Still holding. No leaks." Rick didn't laugh this time. He just nodded slowly and went back to his office. But here's where the story gets really interesting. Because that tractor? Gary farmed with it for the next 23 years. 23 years. From 1977 to 2000. Maintained it carefully, fixed things when they wore out. His total maintenance costs averaged about $108 per year, $4,140 over 23 years. His neighbors who bought new tractors in the late 70s, they spent $18,000 to $32,000 on equipment, made payments for 7 to 10 years, paid thousands in interest, traded them in and started over again. Gary spent $542 in 1976-77 and $4,140 in maintenance over 23 years. Total, $4,682 for 23 years of reliable equipment. But the tractor wasn't the real story. The real story was what Gary did with the money he saved. Every dollar he didn't spend on tractor payments went toward paying off his land faster. His neighbor Jim Peterson bought a new John Deere 4430 in 1977 for $24,500. Financed it at 5% over 7 years. His payment was $380 per month, $4,560 per year. Over 7 years, Jim would pay $31,020 for a $24,500 tractor. Gary had no equipment payment. That $4,560 per year difference went straight toward his land. The 1978 and 1979 seasons were good. Gary netted $8,000 in 78, $9,500 in 79. After his land payment and living expenses, he put $6,200 toward extra principal in 78, $7,600 in 79. By the end of 1979, Gary had paid his land balance down from $76,000 to $48,000. 4 years into a 20-year loan, he'd paid off more than a third of the principal. Then 1980 arrived, and everything changed. Interest rates spiked. Grain prices started falling. The farm crisis began. Corn prices fell from $2.80 to $2.50 to $2.10 per bushel. Gary's income got cut in half. His neighbor Jim Peterson, with his land payment, tractor payment, combine payment, operating loans, total debt service of $18,000 per year, couldn't survive. At $2 tech on corn, Jim netted maybe $8,000. He was $10,000 short. By 1982, Jim was 3 months behind. By 1983, the bank foreclosed. Jim lost everything. Gary watched Jim's auction in October 1983. The 4430 that Jim had bought new in 1977 for $2,400 sold for $9,800. Jim had paid about $22,000 on it so far. He lost his equity and still owed the bank. Gary's rebuilt 1954 Farmall just kept running. No payments, just maintenance. $220 in parts in 1981, $340 in 1982, $180 in 1983. Through the crisis years, Gary couldn't make extra payments, but he made his required payment, and he survived, because the only thing he owed money on was land, and he'd already paid most of it off. By 1984, prices stabilized slightly. Gary could make extra payments again. By the end of 1984, he owed $27,000 on his land. He'd paid off $49,000 in 8 years on a 20-year note. He was close. So close. June 23, 1986, Gary walked into the bank in Mason City with a check for $24,115, his final payment. The loan officer, Margaret, looked at the check, looked at her screen, looked back at Gary. "This is your final payment," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "You were scheduled to pay off in 1989. You're 3 years early." "Yes, ma'am." Margaret printed the satisfaction letter, stamped it, handed it to Gary along with his original deed. "Congratulations, Mr. Henderson. You're one of the few who made it through." Gary folded the documents, put them in his coat pocket, drove home. That night, he walked out to his shop, looked at that 1954 Farmall Super M sitting in the corner. The tractor everyone said was scrap. The tractor he'd rebuilt by hand. He'd bought it for $400 as broken scrap in November 1976. Over 10 years, he'd avoided $25,000 to $35,000 in equipment financing costs. That difference had gone toward extra principal payments. That's what paid off his farm 7 years early. A $400 investment in scrap had saved him 7 years of debt payments. Gary farmed debt-free from 1986 until he retired in 2000. 14 years of keeping every dollar he made. When corn prices recovered in the 90s, climbing to $2.80, then $3.20, then $3.80 per bushel, all that profit was his. No bank payment, no equipment payment, just profit. He saved aggressively, put money into CDs at 5 to 6% interest, compounding. By 2000, he had $420,000 in savings, plus the 280 acres worth $2,100 per acre. He sold the land for $588,000. Combined with his savings, he retired with just over $1 million. The tractor that Rick Sullivan had laughed at in November 1976 had enabled Gary to pay off his land 7 years early and retire a millionaire. Rick Sullivan's dealership, closed in October 1985, couldn't survive the farm crisis. Rick lost everything. Ended up working at a John Deere parts warehouse in Waterloo, making $11.50 per hour until he retired on Social Security. He died in 2007 at 73, never financially recovered. Gary Henderson died in 2018 at age 81. At his funeral, his son Tom displayed the old 1954 Farmall Super M outside the church. Still ran. Still looked decent after 42 years. A small sign next to it read, "Bought for $400 as scrap in 1976. Rebuilt by hand. Farmed for 23 years. Helped pay off the farm. Some things are worth fixing." Inside the church, Tom told the story in his eulogy. The dealer laughed when Dad paid $400 for a broken tractor. Said it was scrap. Said it couldn't be fixed. Said Dad wasted his money. Tom paused, looking at the crowd of over 300 farmers. Dad took it home, spent 4 months in his shop, fixed everything the dealer said was unfixable. farmed with it for 23 years, used the money he saved to pay off our farm 7 years early, retired with over $1 million. Another pause. Dad taught me that most things aren't broken beyond repair. They just need someone willing to do the work. The dealer laughed because he didn't know how to fix things. He only knew how to sell new things. Dad knew how to fix things. That's why Dad retired wealthy, and the dealer went bankrupt. But the story doesn't end there. Tom, who had become an engineer, started teaching weekend sessions in his shop, teaching young farmers what Gary had taught him: welding, engine rebuilding, hydraulics. Basic mechanical skills that had been lost as farming became dependent on dealers and financing. In 2020, Farm Journal magazine published an article about Gary's story titled "The 400 Tractor That Paid Off a Farm." It went viral. Within a month, it had been shared over 50,000 times. Farmers from across the Midwest contacted Tom asking for copies of Gary's rebuild notes. Tom scanned them, posted them online as a free download. Within a year, over 15,000 people had downloaded them. Some were using them to rebuild their own tractors. Others were using them as teaching materials for high school ag programs, bringing back shop classes. Gary's $400 investment in a scrap tractor in November 1976 ended up teaching mechanical skills to thousands of farmers 4 decades later. The John Deere dealer laughed when Gary Henderson paid $400 for a broken Farmall in 1976. Said it was scrap, said it couldn't be fixed, said Gary wasted his money. Gary rebuilt it by hand, farmed with it for 23 years, used the money he saved to pay off his farm 7 years early, retired a millionaire, and left documentation that taught thousands of farmers how to do the same. The dealer went bankrupt. Gary's legacy grew. Sometimes the person being laughed at is the only one who understands what's possible. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like and subscribe. And leave a comment below. What's something everyone told you was impossible that you proved them wrong about? I read every single comment.